Is this judge about to throw a former US president in jail?
Hey, Dan, great to be with you. No, I don't think so, to answer your question shortly. Each of these felony convictions do carry a maximum of 4 years in prison. So, I mean, it could be 34 times 4 years in prison. That's quite a long time. But no, I mean, these are Class E felonies. In New York State, that's the lowest class of felony. Donald Trump is a first-time offender. So I think much more likely we will see a fine or probation.
So what do we know about Trump's likely appeal? He says he's going to push back on this. What's that going to look like?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there are a few dates to keep in mind. The first and most important is July 11th. That is when Judge Merchan will sentence Trump in this case. And then from there, we will absolutely see an appeal from Trump's legal team. And, you know, there is a question as to whether or not that appeal process will happen and reach a conclusion before or after November 5th, of course, Election Day. Trump's legal team to this point, in other cases around the country, has done quite a good job of delaying cases such that they won't come up before November 5th. I think they'll probably try and do the same in this case.
And of course, the sentencing will also take place on the eve of the Republican National Convention as well, where Trump is expected to be confirmed as the presidential candidate. So, Rob, when we take a step back and look at the situation here, do you think these convictions are enough to sway undecided voters stateside?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's the million-dollar question we've all been asking all evening. I think the short answer is no. There are not that many voters today who will be swayed one way or the other, given the 34 felony convictions that were released this afternoon. The most recent polling tells us that about 17% of voters across the board say that they are less likely to vote for Donald Trump given a felony conviction. So that's a pretty small slice to begin with. It gets even smaller when we're talking about independent voters. That's 11%. And of course, it gets even smaller when we're talking about Republican voters. That's 10%. So, you know, there are certainly voters out there who will look at this and say, I was thinking about voting for Donald Trump, or maybe I just wasn't sure to begin with. Now I'm a little bit less likely to vote for Trump. But honestly, I don't see that being a huge swath of voters, and I certainly don't see these convictions being something that could move Trump voters into Biden's camp. I honestly, at this point, I think there are enough voters who have their minds up one way or another. Obviously, they know these candidates, both Trump and President Biden, quite well, that these convictions probably serve to solidify preconceived notions. If you're a Democrat, you believed Trump was guilty months, if not years ago. If you're a Republican, you believe that District Attorney Bragg's prosecution of Trump is entirely politically motivated. So I don't see a lot of minds changing given the convictions today.
Yeah, indeed. And I think the question is, you know, does this help or hinder Trump with the base? And on balance, I would probably contend it helps because, as you say, it only supercharges those preconceived narratives that have been in place for some time now already. Rob, also looking over to the other side here, do you think this is, net beneficial for President Biden and his campaign? And what is the narrative that you expect them to put forward now that Trump has been convicted? Is this something that they can use, to their own advantage here, or is it something that they move away from and say we're going to distance ourselves because this is too hot? How does Biden play this?
Yeah, I do think it is net beneficial to the Biden campaign, absolutely. Although I don't think it changes the narrative of the campaign that we've seen to this point. I mean, I think the campaign is doing their best to really juxtapose the relative, and some people will disagree with this, but the relative stability that we've seen during the Biden administration to what has really been chaos throughout this trial. I mean, Trump speaking to the media every day after this trial, now being convicted of 34 felonies. While Trump's campaign this time around has actually been incredibly professional, and I would argue more successful, more professional than in 2016 and in 2020, the juxtaposition of Biden as our current president, the incumbent, with Donald Trump now a convicted felon, the first convicted felon in presidential history, I do think that the Biden campaign will do their best to play up that juxtaposition, that contrast. But, frankly, they've been doing that since the beginning of the campaign. They've been doing it since 2020. So I don't think we're going to see anything new from the campaigns. But like we've said, we're going to see a doubling down.